Okay, welcome. I want to cover some of the codes as they relate to building decks, exterior decks. Anybody in construction long enough definitely has an interest in knowing this knowledge because decks seems to be a pretty common part of our lives. But nonetheless, in the section of the building code book that has decks is R507. So it is in chapter 5. It is a part of floor framing, and that's why I cover it here, because we're in floor framing now. The first thing I want to talk about is ledger plates. We're going to specifically look at this chart here, and we're going to, during this video, we're going to look at the ledger bolt connectors here. We're going to look at this, and we're going to study some of the other codes as they relate to ledger board connection. So the first thing I want to do is just show you what a ledger board is. A ledger board is the board in the house, or the board in the deck, I'm sorry, that connects to the house. So it's the first point of contact your deck has with the house. So looking at these pictures, you can see there's a ledger board here. This one right here, the ledger board is hidden, but it's there. So these are all ledger boards. And that's what we're talking about, this ledger board. But I want to show you why this is a very important subject. Because decks fail all the time. And the main point of failure for a deck is that connection to that house. So over the years, that topic has become more prevalent because more and more people keep getting hurt because of deck failure. So we have to make sure that that ledger board that connects that deck to that house is way more than enough to make sure it's safe. Now remember, you could have multiple people. You could have 10 or 15 people on a deck easily, and that could result in serious injury. So definitely want to make sure that we do this correctly. Okay. So knowing this, we'll go back to chapter 5 of the IRC. Of course, this is the online edition, so you guys have access to these codes. But we'll look at this chart first right here. And what I want to point out is the joist spans. What I want to tell you is the bigger the deck, the bigger the joist span you're going to have, and the stricter you're going to be required to, how do I say that right? The requirements become stricter, meaning you're going to have to put more bolts on the ledger plate as the deck becomes bigger. So it relates to joist span. So if you're only going 6 feet with your joist span, you can see that the requirements are not as strict if you're putting a deck that actually spans up to 16.1 to 18 feet. So you're going to be putting a lot more bolts in your ledger plate on a deck that's bigger, is basically what I'm trying to say. And you have to know that this is based off a 1/2 inch diameter bolt. If you look over here, and depending on what sheeting you're attaching into, like if you're into a 1/2 inch sheeting, depending on what you have there, you have to make sure you're in the right column. But normally we're attaching into 1/2 inch sheeting into the band board, so the first column is adequate. But take a look over that too, and know how to select what on-spinner spacing you need out of this area here for the fasteners. Again, this is the deck ledger connection to band joist, and that is, if I can highlight it here, that is that board right here as it attached to that house. And this illustration right here is pretty nice because it shows the bolts that we're talking about, because this is the ledger board. So that chart that we looked up above tells us the on-center spacing for these bolts that we're going to put in here. Now there's a few other codes we need to know, and the first one is never within 2 inches of the top edge do you place a bolt. Never within 3/4 of the bottom edge, and never within 2 inches of the leading edge. So take a look at those 3 codes right there. Understand that those bolts cannot go in those locations, and burn those in your memory because those are important. The other thing is, take a look at this. And notice that this is in reference to if you're using a 2x8, a 2x10, or a 2x12. And what it's saying is from the top edge to here, the minimum. So 5.5 minimum for a 2x8, all the way up to 7.5 minimum for a 2x12. So that is the minimum for that bolt placement right there. And the maximum would be the 3/4 again that I already highlighted right here. So that row of bolts needs to fall in that target zone. As you notice, this is pretty precise stuff. They take this pretty seriously. It's because a lot of people have gotten hurt, so we got to get this right. The next thing that you do notice that everything is fastened into a low, high pattern. So it is staggered. Bolts are staggered with a 5-inch maximum spacing in between the top row and the bottom row. So you got a lot of codes going on here. I want you to read over and pay attention to them because it all relates to how you bolt that ledger plate to the house. I wish this were it, but this is not it. There are other things that we also have to know too. This is just reference to the actual lag bolts themselves. But if you look at this chart and this, well, I should say graphic, this graphic and this graphic, it does give us some brackets that we are also required to put in there. So in addition to the bolts, we have to put that brackets, or we can put this bracket here. I don't like this one myself because in order to install this bracket, your floor joists from your deck on the exterior have to line up with the floor joists on the interior. So it does take a little extra provision to make these happen. So if you're going to use this method, you know, even on the inside of the house, you have to make requirements of nailing your sheeting down extra tight in that area. I know that seems like a lot, and it is a lot, but you know, when people are getting hurt, then that subject becomes more and more important. So the nailing requirements for the subfloor into the floor joists become stricter. All right. I do like this method better, and I'll explain to you why. Because my floor joists don't have to line up to the inside. I simply have to put these brackets according to these rules right here. And what it says is the bracket has to have a 700-pound capacity. I have to place them at least in 4 locations, evenly distributed along the deck, and one within 24 inches of each end of the ledger. Hold down devices shall be fully engaged deck joist per hold down manufacturer. And here is the screwing requirements down here. A fully threaded 3/4 inch, or 3/4, I apologize, 3/8, I misspoke, diameter lag screw, pre-drilled with a minimum of 3-inch penetration to the center of the top plate studs or header. So it has to hit the top plates here or the header board. If it doesn't hit that board, then this method is null and void. So anyways, you have that method or this method, and you have to know about your lag bolt placement, because you don't want to be this guy. That doesn't look well on your company, and more importantly, somebody could get hurt. So definitely an important subject. Take the time to review it, and I'll see you soon.